Hello and welcome to Inside the Therapy Room. I'm your host, Sam Sellers. I'm a registered therapist, a wife, and a fur mama, and I'm passionate about breaking down the barriers and stigma attached to therapy. I want to begin by honouring the traditional custodians of the land we live and work on. Today, Renee is in Wurundjeri country and Sam is on Gundungurra land. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions and cultures of our First Nations people. We must always remember that the land below our feet is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today we're chatting to Renee Magri, who is a grief counsellor that specialises in pet loss support for before and after the loss of our animal friends. Her passion for this much-needed support grew immensely after losing her beloved Boxer Buckley to a terminal illness at the young age of 5.5. Having always had a keen interest in grief and loss, it was a natural progression for her to take her qualifications and direct it to helping the wider community with what can be one of the most difficult losses you will ever go through. Tune in to hear her share about working with those who have experienced pet loss, talking about when someone may need this type of support, the impact pet loss can have on someone, and what it's like inside her therapy room, which is virtual. And last but not least, what myth she would love to smash around pet grief. We hope you enjoy joining us inside the therapy room. Welcome, Renee. How are you going?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
I am great. You are in Melbourne, correct?
I'm just outside of Melbourne, probably about 50 minutes from the CBD, but not far.
Still chilly down there?
Well, today, believe it or not, Sam, it's like 10 degrees where I am. So, yes,
it is. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it is. I'm obviously in Goulburn, and it is the windiest place I have ever lived in my 32 years of life. It is, and it's pulling out all stops today. It is just blowing it down, which is not great for the washing on the line. But yeah.
No.
It is it is wonderful to have you here. So you are a grief counsellor, but you specialise in a really unique area, which is around pet loss. So tell us a little bit about what brought you to specialising in pet grief and pet loss.
Sure, absolutely. I'd first like to say thank you for inviting me and thank you for having me, and I'm delighted to be here with you. A little bit about my story of what brought me here. At the end of 2016, I lost one of the greatest loves of my life, which is my Boxer Buckley. And like many others, he was, still is my very best friend and one of the greatest loves of my life. So he was diagnosed with a terminal illness at the very young age of 3 years and 10 months, which shook me, out of my core, honestly. And we were given a 6 to 12 month prognosis with him. We had 20 months with him. And after he passed away, the grief that came to me was huge, and I was feeling a whole lot of things that I had never felt before. And at that time I was almost at the end. I had about 4 months to go with my counselling studies and almost there with finishing that, and always had an interest in grief and loss. So it was like a natural thing for the two things to come together, because I knew that I was not the only one that felt such a profound sense of grief. So it was a natural progression for me. And a few months later, I decided to become a niche pet loss counsellor, pet loss grief counsellor, and been in the space for about 6.5 years now.
Love that. I mean, I think a running theme that is happening as I'm sort of doing these episodes is that everybody's niche tends to just happen really organically. And I think most people don't necessarily expect to land in that space. But it happens, and I think that that's when you know that it's the right space for you.
Couldn't agree more.
It does also tend to come out of lived experience as well. I think it's what drives us is our own experience. For those people out there who are watching this, Renee's sweet boy is behind her. And if you are listening or reading, jump on to YouTube, which is where this will be, or onto your social media, I'm assuming, where he will be. What breed is he, or was he?
Buckley is a boxer. So for anyone of your listeners or viewers, that has a boxer or knows somebody with a boxer, they would know that, yes, they're very playful, very goofy, very funny, very loyal, and big smoochy boys and girls. So he's just always be my boy. And they're a great breed. But of course, everyone thinks they've got the best breed, but boxers are the best breed.
I think it's funny. It is one of those things that it's like the dog version of like Apple or iPhone. Not Apple or iPhone, they're the same thing. Apple or Samsung. And it's like everybody thinks that they've got the sweetest, most loving breed. But I was mentioning to you before we started that I have my own experience as well with pet loss, and my sweet Barney was a King Charles Cavalier, and they are obviously a really beautiful, sweet-natured breed. So I think everybody thinks that they've got the best. We have a cavoodle at the moment, though. She's pretty special.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, she's got super bad separation anxiety, but which I just think she'd be the perfect dog if she would let us leave for like 20 minutes without her.
Yeah.
But,
bless her.
She just loves being with people, and but I think it just, solidifies that bond that you build with not just dogs, but, any sort of pet or animal companion. There is that huge bond.
Yeah. There is. Yeah.
Who would be looking for this type of support? Who falls into this category?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because having the conversations and talking about it is really helpful. So who would be? Now, in terms of pet loss grief, there's different types of loss, and that's going to affect everybody differently. And so I'll start off with pre-loss, leading up to potentially end-of-life decisions. That's a big factor there. There's a lot of what's called anticipatory grief that normally stems in there. So essentially that means grief before a loss. So there's support there. If somebody's companion is starting to age, they might not be terminal yet, but age is creeping up on them. So there's numerous things there. Also, of course, post-loss, and after we've lost our companions, there's grief after the loss. Another type of grief and loss that can come in very much so with pet loss grief is what's called ambiguous grief. There can be a lot of ambiguity, and I can give you a couple of examples of that. And that would be if your companion has run away, if they've been stolen from you, which both things are so very hard, and it does unfortunately happen. If, there was something like a relationship breakdown, and sometimes there's shared custody, but often there's not. And one person has sole custody of their companion. So therefore, the other person doesn't have any involvement in their life anymore. We always hope that can be worked out, but sometimes it doesn't. Rehoming, and there's many reasons that can happen. Moving overseas for a job, and many people can take their companions with them. Some people just can't. So there's going to be lots of variables sitting in there, but there's a lot in there that grief can be present. So with ambiguous grief, when your pet is living, So in a rehoming sense, or if your companion has like run away from you, a lot of the time they can still be living. So there's grief that can and often is very much there with those sorts of loss as well.
I'm wondering, is there even, I'm thinking about um, animals can get illnesses and things like that in terms of, there could be animals who might need a limb amputated or might go blind or things
Mm-hmm.
like that. And so the pet that once was is no longer. It's sort of,
Yeah.
that can change a pet's temperament. It can change their personality. And so, I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if there's space in that ambiguous grief as well for that. That would be really difficult because you've still got your pet, but you've still got your companion.
Yep.
They look different and their personality is different and they're not the same as they once were, which can be really difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. That's something that can definitely come out
Yeah.
within the grief. So you're losing who you both were
Mm.
pre things presenting themselves.
Yeah.
So that's a really good thing to mention. That absolutely can be there. Something like that can also sit when we have a diagnosis and our relationship is one way and then it steps into palliation and palliative care. um, you're always caring, loving, and supporting. That doesn't shift. But yeah, there could be some grief there where the relationship, I just want to reiterate, is very connected still, but there's things that you're missing, and it could be daily walks that you used to do together that you can't do anymore. Things like that. So yeah, absolutely. So there's a huge there's a lot within the grief space that resides next to our animal companions when
Yeah,
things happen.
absolutely. I'm also thinking about, like I mentioned, our girl Naya has separation anxiety. So if we go anywhere, we have a pet sitter who comes and looks after her, and so I'm thinking, people who work in
Mm-hmm,
that
mm-hmm,
space,
mm-hmm.
who are, she is the only person we use. She's here, relatively regularly, and has known Naya since she was, a pup, and so, there
Yeah.
would almost be a loss that a grief around losing a pet that wasn't even their own, as well.
Mm-hmm,
That's a
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
really
Yes.
sort of
Yep.
messy, complex space to sit in because it's like, well, they weren't my pet, but
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's still grief, it's still loss, and it's still
Yes.
something that deserves a space to be held and worked through.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Thank you for mentioning that as well. That's another very good thing to raise and to create awareness around. I think awareness is one of the biggest things that it's one of my favorite words. My
yeah,
clients, I'll often tell them from the get-go, I'll say, you're going to hear me say the word awareness a few
yeah,
times, but I think you can
absolutely.
never have enough of it. And
Yeah,
that's really an important thing that you mentioned because our people that are caring for animals in some capacity, whether it's a service-based industry or friend, like if you've got within your family dynamics, you might
yeah,
have another family member's dog or a friend. I've had several times brought into said that to me as well, that they know somebody's dog and they're grieving them because they're such a big part of everybody's life. I mean, they're the true testament of unconditional love, our animal friends,
absolutely. Yeah.
they I always say they ask for very little and they give us so much back in
Yeah.
return.
I feel like one of the things that comes out of my mouth so many times, as my wife and I watch way too much TikTok videos, and a good 50% of those videos are dog videos. And
Yeah.
so I feel like I say the words, we don't deserve dogs, come out of my mouth so many times because I think, as you said, they are just we're focusing very much on dogs because that's where my heart is, but they are the epitome of unconditional love. And if you're ever in a bad mood, just find a dog, they'll put your
Yeah.
smiling face.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
yes,
they
I
sure
focused
will.
a bit on dogs, but there are other pets, cats, birds,
Yes.
lizards,
Yep.
horses,
Yep.
all, pet
Yep.
loss is pet loss, regardless of,
Mm.
what pet it is, how long you had it, those sorts of things.
Yep.
I think that's important to note. We talk about
Yeah,
dogs all the time,
absolutely.
popular pet, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there are a variety of other pets that fall into this category as well. Um,
There sure is. There sure is. I think fur, feathers, or scales.
yeah,
Every
absolutely.
single one of them, we have a unique bond with every single one of the species within the animal world.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
That's a really great way to
I've got an
summarize it.
alpaca. I've got an alpaca. I've got an alpaca. So there
Oh
you
my
go. That's
goodness.
I've got my goofy boy, and
Yeah.
people that follow me on my socials would know a bit about Sir Goofy,
Oh,
as I call him.
love that. I love the fur, feathers and scales. It just like the challenge in me is to come up with a pet that doesn't fall into that category. But I'm
Yeah.
not sure that there is. I'm trying to think of one, but I can't seem to, because they do tend to, yeah.
Let
It's
me
gonna
know.
keep
Let me
ticking
know when you
over
think
in
of
my head now.
it.
Um, what, I guess, do you want people to know? Like, what is there something
Mm.
in terms of pet loss, pet grief that people might not be aware of?
Yeah, sure, sure. There's lots and lots of things, but I think the first thing I'd like to share with you is to let the community know is that support is available.
Mm,
There is support out there, and in many different forms, whether that be private sessions, support groups, whatever it may be. Um, and nothing is ever crazy, silly, or stupid
yeah,
what you think within your own pet loss grief space. And that is something, that narrative has been said to me hundreds of times, hundreds of times. Conversation will start, Renee, you might think I'm silly and crazy for thinking this, but I'm thinking, no. So that nothing is crazy.
yeah,
It's what you feel, and it's really has a voice and it has meaning. So that is the first thing.
absolutely.
With grief itself, maybe just a quick difference between what is grief and mourning, because that can be a little bit confusing. And I think it's really helpful to try to create like a foundation when you're trying to process something that's very profound in your life. So that's one thing I really like to create a foundation. So the difference between grief and mourning. So grief is what we feel on the inside, our thoughts and feelings. We can feel that emotionally and physically. So something to be aware of. And mourning is how you express that.
Mm,
So that's the difference.
yeah,
Another thing, and these are my own thoughts,
yeah.
is that grief can't be fixed.
Mm, I would
Grief is
agree.
something that we learn to process and carry and integrate into our life.
Yeah,
It's a very individual journey.
yeah,
No one will grieve the same way. So to fix, I'll speak about sort of myself. If I was to fix my grief with my Buckley, I'd have to have him back living and by my side. And
yeah,
unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So to me, we don't get over it. We don't move on. I'm not going to be okay with it one day and just wake up and go, oh, okay, Buckley's died.
yeah,
That's not negotiable for me. So yeah, we can't fix it. That's my thoughts. The other thing is there's no rush. There's
yeah.
no time limits with this.
Mm,
Another conversation I have all the time, be Renee, I've been feeling these feelings for 2 years. Like what's happening?
yeah,
So there's no time limits. I'll have grief with me for the rest of my life at Buckley forever. So it's with me for the long term.
yeah. I think that's a really good point,
Yeah.
because it's like, it's funny that you mentioned there not being any sort of rush, because it will be 4 years in December since we lost Barney, and I still have him as my background on my phone. I still
Mm-hmm.
have the profile picture on my Facebook page that I changed it to
Mm-hmm.
back in that year. And I only said to my wife last night, actually, I still can't change it. There is still that part of me that just, it's a way that I honor him. It's just, and it's too painful still to change that. Yes, I have healed and I hold that grief very differently than I did 4 years ago, even 2 years ago. But it's never just suddenly going to be okay. I think, I tell my clients all the time, we don't need to make sense of something, because if, it doesn't need to make sense. When we make sense of something, we rationalize it and it becomes okay. And it doesn't ever need to be okay. It will never be okay. My sweet boy died on the side of the road. That's never going to be okay for me. And so I think that that's important for people to sort of get around, because it is one of those griefs where people sort of go, aren't you over it by now? Like, just like you said, just get another dog, like get another pet, replace it. Or, it's not as simple as that. So I think that that's a really important point that people sort of do need to remember, that it is okay to still be grieving and still be mourning, still be holding that years down the track, because it's not something that is just ever going to go away or disappear.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I really want to normalize I want to normalize this. I want to normalize and validate and acknowledge pet loss grief, and also for what you're feeling as well. And just to give you a very snapshot parallel, I mean, Buckley died 7 years ago. I still have his bed out behind me on my shelving behind here. I've still got his medicine basket. He was on, all these different meds. It's exactly the same way as it was on from the day that he passed away. And I've just got it there. I've got his behind me as well, his collar, his lead, things like that. And why? It's because I want to. The right way to grieve is your way, is our way. And there's no right and there's no wrong. And you can't grieve wrong. The right way is your way. So this is why it's so individualized, and nothing is wrong. Others might have their thoughts and opinions and might try to tell you that you should be over it and all of those things. But at the end of the day, I look at that's someone's thoughts and feelings, and they're allowed to have that. Doesn't mean it's true, and it doesn't mean it's right. It's the way we choose to receive that or not. And then channel into what serves you, what's going to actually help you process and work through. And, I mentioned before that we can't fix grief, but there is so much we can do to support it, to guide it, to work on ways to have it there. And that is going to be different for everybody. And the grief journey, I keep saying, is very individual. It's going to be different. But that's one thing I would like people to know, your listeners, is that there is support there to hug it tight. Grief doesn't feel nice. It feels very uncomfortable a lot of the time. So our mindset can be, how do I fix this? I feel, what do I do? If we had all the answers, I would give them to everybody. I would give the instructions. I would give all the text. We learn about things, but it's about operationalizing things our way. And it's what resonates with one might not be with the other. And this is why I say there's no rush. It's one step at a time. We can't, I think if we rush and force it, that can add pressure. And we don't want to add more in there. So it's very much where you are. And I really try to encourage that. The disenfranchisement, that's a bit of a tongue twister word, disenfranchised. So let's just say disenfranchised grief can be very much in the animal world too. So very quickly, if anyone that wasn't sure what that is, it's when your grief and loss doesn't get acknowledged by others or society. And Sam, as you mentioned before, it's when that narrative of it was just a bird, you can just go and get another one, get over it. Oh, I always get a bit I see when I hear that.
Gross. Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
oh.
I mean, and it's one of those really ironic sort of situations in terms of still having, like you mentioned, having the collar and the bed and things like that. Because if we lose human loved ones, we still have belongings. We still have little trinkets. We might still have grandma's vase, in the cupboard or on the mantelpiece, their photos out, their clothes. I have, a few pieces of my dad's clothing in my wardrobe and, sentimental pieces. And that's very normalized to keep those trinkets and it's a way to memorialize them in our present world. And so I think the more that we can normalize that our furry, I think I found a loophole in your fur feathers and scales. I think we have shells because we have crustaceans. I was like,
yes.
My mum used to have yabbies, and so I was like, oh, they don't fall into that. So we've got shells. Let's add shells to that.
Shells. Yeah, that's a good one. Let me write that down.
Yeah.
I have written that down. That's a good one.
But I think, we just need to find space to normalize the fact that this grief is just as valid and just as normal as human grief. And the way that we memorialize that is no different to the way that we would memorialize human grief. So I think that
absolutely, for sure.
So we sort of led into it when you were talking about there's no right or wrong way to grieve. So tell us, I guess, a little bit about what this group of people, so anybody who is experiencing any form of pet loss, pet grief, what are they going to experience in the room with you specifically? What's that?
Well, in terms, I really do my best to create a very safe space first and foremost. So that's something I really always do my best, and let the person with me settle into the session space at a pace that's best for them. So there's all emotions are allowed. I really, really like to put out there because it often is a very emotional time for them, and it's hard. It's hard to be able to talk and express such deep pain. So I really like to bring that out so much. And anything we don't want to talk about, that's so okay, just to let me know. So it's about just going at things at their pace. There's often within the grief space what I call different layers within pet loss grief. And some examples of that would be the feelings of guilt, sadness, loneliness, a shift in somebody's identity too can very much shift. You're known for somebody with your companion, and when they're not there, you don't know who you are. Lack of motivation to do things, creating new normals. There's a lot going on. So that space of unpacking it. This is at that person's pace. So within that, there's many different ways. Some people like to just chat about things. I can generally, I like to listen very much as I can. And once I listen and hear what is going on for that person, then I'm always guiding and supporting the whole time, of course. So we might step into learning some really simplistic, effective coping suggestions, coping tips, things that I think can really benefit to meet that person where they're at in that here and now. Now, that can ebb and flow. I can bring some visuals into the session and things like that, but it's really from where I'm sitting. It's about, as I said, really listening and really trying to get on specific and clearly identify what is going on for that person. Prior to me meeting somebody for the first time, there'll be a very simplistic intake information process where I ask some on point questions, I like to think, and that is so important to me. And I'll often go over that 2 or 3 times to get an idea before we even meet of where that person is at. I also invite, if my client would like to, prior to me even meeting them, to share with me, only if they wanted to, some photos of their beloved. I invite them to share a few words about them, their beautiful everlasting love and relationship, if they'd like to. There's no obligation. Some people do, and some people prefer, because that can be upsetting too. But when I receive that, my heart is warmed. I love seeing the photos. It's also a space where people can bring photos in and show me. They might have the items of their beloved. We might talk about that. We might talk about, for example, like a coping. I love the sensory things, like what we can see, hear, smell, taste. Now, sensory is so supportive within the pet loss grief space. So I might, we might bring that in. We might talk about it. We might talk about how, whether it's a bird swing or a collar or a horse bridle, whatever it may be, how we can incorporate that into support. Because my thing is, relationships continue, love continues, love doesn't die. I'm such a big, you can hear my voice getting really, really passionate, because
I love it.
That is, that is one of my biggest things on my own personal journey with Buckley that has supported me. So there's many, many, many different things that we can bring in, but and everyone's so unique, and every journey is unique, and I really take that on. It's not one size fits all by any means. So I hope that's given just a little bit of a snapshot of what a session could be like.
I mean, I think people have this imagery, and I probably did as well before I got into this industry, that grief therapy is morbid. It's just a lot of crying. It's just overwhelming. It's all consuming. And there absolutely is times of that. But I find for a lot of people, and once I got to the stage where I was able to, one of the most beautiful parts of grief therapy was having somebody who was just going to listen to me talk about all of the wonderful things about him, who wanted to know all of those things, who was happy for me to sit there and show them, 100 photos that I took, and, all of that can be a really beautiful moment in that grief journey.
Yeah.
And it's not all doom and gloom, and it's not all sad. There are those pockets of beauty, where you get that undivided attention from somebody, particularly if the other people in your family are also grieving it, and everybody's journey is looking different. It makes it difficult to have those pockets where you get to just talk about your loved pet and companion without feeling like you also need to hold space for somebody else in the family. A really beautiful part of grief therapy.
Absolutely.
I think it's
the other thing is too that comes in is relief.
Yeah.
It's a relief for people, as for all the things that you said. It's a relief to be able to say things that you have a reservation with people out, within your own network, that you might be judged, criticised, your loss won't be validated. In saying all that, there's also a lot of wonderful support through family and friends. I've heard, because that's something I always do really check in on, how's your support system? What's there? If there's not, how can we work on that if you need more? But so there's a lot of, I really want to acknowledge and thank family and friends that are supporting their loved one with such a profound loss of their animal companion. And thank you for understanding, and thank you for being that person to be there. This is the thing with grief, because there can be a mentality from family and friends that we need to try to fix that person. They can tend to sort of want to try to do all these sort of things that they think could be helpful, and their heart is normally in the right place.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time it's not overly helpful. And I say that with my hand on my heart, because their heart is in their right place. And sometimes it's hard just to sit with grief. It is I'm definitely not sugarcoating it by any means, because it can be very, very difficult. Yeah. But I really love how you said that the session space can, yes, it can be very emotional. We're really acknowledging that, but it's also another side that can really open up so much, I'm going to say, opportunity to give you hope.
Yeah.
To working with these challenges, to healing. Life is going to be different.
Yeah.
There's a before and there's an after, and it looks very different. So there's new normals. There's a lot to carry and process. We're absolutely acknowledging that. But one thing that brings me, it's a privilege for what I do, but when I see somebody, and you would relate to this, Sam, I'm sure very much so, that we start the session, particularly the first session, and there is apprehension going into a session. Hand up for me too. I've been to counselling and stuff, and it is,
it's terrifying sometimes.
It is going to be absolutely daunting and terrifying, and there's a lot of anticipation stepping into the session. What I love and warms my heart, and the relatability I said with you as well, is that when you see that person sort of settle in more into the session and know that this is a safe space, know that I can say whatever I want and I won't be judged, I can actually see that transformation as the session goes on, which it just gives me it's just a feeling of just heartwarmed, and that I can be there to let them be them, authentically them. And I'm sure you could feel that too.
Yeah,
too.
One of my favorite things is to tell my clients that I want this space, because it's hard to create a space that is completely safe, because we don't know what that looks like for somebody. But I like to tell my clients that I want to create a space that's filter free. I want you to not have to filter your words, your language, your experience for the sake of me. It is my job to sync up with you, not the other way around. And so I love, people sort of tend to relate to that, because you do often hear, oh, I shouldn't say that in front of such and such because that'll make them upset or something like that. And so one of the most beautiful parts of therapy in general, but particularly grief therapy, I think, is that ability to not have to filter your experience. I want to quickly say something before we get to my favorite part of the podcast, which is the smashing of myths.
Yes.
I want to shout out to all of the parents out there. Send your kids to therapy when a pet dies if they're struggling with it, because children feel pet grief just as much as we adults do, sometimes if not more. They're little humans with big emotions, and they need space to be able to process the loss of pets as well. It is not just adults who need this space. It's the little ones in our worlds as well, because it's a lot. It's a lot for them to understand, just even on a base level, that, their beloved family pet is no longer coming home. And so that's a big concept for little ones to understand. And so, they need space. They need the space to be able to work through that, and to not pressure them to feel okay about it in a quick manner. Just
Yeah.
because you might
Yeah.
be and you're processing it well doesn't mean that your children need to process it in the same way. And to
Yeah.
allow space for that. It might not be therapy, but it might be creating a little garden in the backyard where they can, have a little memorial in the same way that we would with a human. We have funerals, we have grief rituals, we can do all of the same things. And I think kids need
Yeah.
that space.
Yeah.
Just as
Yeah.
much, if not
Absolutely.
more, because
Yeah. Yeah.
it is big emotions for little humans. So
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Thank you for talking about that too, because it's bang on.
yeah, it's huge.
We look at all the animals and how much children, they're their best friends, a lot of them, how they
Absolutely.
rely on them, how they
Yeah,
support them, how they can calm them.
yeah.
Yeah, that's another big
Mm,
conversation, but
yeah.
absolutely, yes,
Ooh,
in terms of when the pet actually or companion actually passes away. Yeah, I'll keep talking about it, but just being really honest and
yeah,
yeah, on their level, of course. But there's many things that
absolutely.
can be brought in to help children process,
Yeah,
grief as well. So that's a really
yeah.
good thing to talk about.
And I always say there's a book for everything these days. People are so creative at creating
Yep.
resources for adults and children alike. There is a book for everything. There are things out there, if, where I think we both can probably understand that therapy is not accessible for everybody on a financial
Mm-hmm,
level or
mm-hmm.
on a location level. But there are books, there are resources, there are things online that can help you in your family home process that grief in
Yes.
a really wholesome and authentic way that doesn't involve therapy because, like I
Yep.
said, it's not
Yes.
always an accessible service. Um,
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
let's smash a myth, Renee. I love this bit. It's my favorite part of
Ah,
the podcast. Like I've said in all of these episodes, I've asked you guys all to think of a myth that you would like to smash about your passion space. What is that myth that we're
yes.
smashing?
Mm, that's yeah. I've been thinking about this one, and there can be different ways that it can be approached. But I don't know if it's so much a myth, but more just I guess a message or just something that I'm want to put out there to potentially people that don't really. I'm going to say where the disenfranchisement
Mm,
space it's in. I just want to say pet loss grief is real grief.
yeah,
And that
absolutely.
it is real grief.
Yeah,
And I just want people to know that. Pet loss grievers would know that. But people outside of that space, it's real grief. Um, Never think like you have to move on or get over it. That's another kind of thing that society can put on you that you should be feeling a certain way by a certain time.
yeah,
So I don't know if that's a myth, but more just I guess a message that don't feel like you need to move on.
yeah.
And it's never, ever, ever, ever just a pet. Never, ever.
Yes. Oh, just.
Never. It's
Yeah,
never ever. No
absolutely.
matter what anybody tells you,
Mm,
it's never ever ever just up.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, that's and
I
just know
think
that
that
you're not
is a myth.
alone.
I think
Yeah,
pet loss
yeah,
can,
it might
like
be.
the pet loss being like a real loss and a real grief. I think there is an element in there that is a bit of a myth because I think there are some people,
Yeah,
sadly, who don't validate, understand, affirm that that is real pain, that is real grief,
yeah,
and it doesn't just look like sadness. I mean, when I lost Barney, I had what would describe as, PTSD symptoms. I was
yeah,
having nightmares. I had flashbacks. I couldn't go like I said to you before, we would drive 3 hours out of our way to visit family because I could not drive on that stretch of the road. And so I think it is, there does need to be that smashing of it not being real and it just being sad. Because it goes much beyond that. And there is a real element of trauma that can go into pet loss and pet grief. And so, I think, let's get rid of that notion that it is somehow not a normal grief, that it does need to look like sadness. I think that's rubbish, to be quite frank. I think that's rubbish.
Yeah.
So I love that.
And someone will listen. Someone will listen, and someone will listen to you, even when you think there isn't anyone. I don't want, that's one of the biggest things. I don't want anyone to feel like they're alone.
Yeah.
And you've got to carry this all on your own, because if it's not a myth, let's make it one, because it's
absolutely. I think
you don't have to carry it.
Yeah.
You don't have to carry it. And whether it's with me or other support platforms, there are a whole range of things, like you tapped on before. Therapy isn't for everyone. But there are so many other things out there, whether it's a book, all of those things. It could be, some affirmation cards. It could be resources. There's so many wonderful things out there. But it's what you connect with. And it is hard, but when you step into things, you might be surprised how things can really help you process these really tough challenges.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think a really great way to end this is going to be that if you need to find that space, that Renee, you mentioned that you have a support group. So I think that might be a really beautiful way to end this, that if you don't have your people, if you don't have that community, if you don't have people who are going to affirm that that loss is real, maybe this space might be a really great space for like-mindedness. Have you got a little tidbit about that support group?
Oh, very, very much so. I love my support groups. We've got a beautiful community is so important, I think. If you can be with like-minded people who you can relate to, who you can share your truth with, talk about your beloved, it can be so helpful. So yes, I do have my own Facebook support group. It's my group. I admin it. The members are beautiful. I've had so much wonderful feedback about it, how the group has just been there for them. I try to put as much in the group as I can, whether that's sharing some tips. I try to do a live here and there. I need to clone me. I need to have another one of me. Sometimes they've got it. But I do my I do my best. But that is there. It's free. It doesn't cost anything.
Love that.
And everyone is most welcome. And I know online people will be, but I say this with the kindest heart. I'm a very fair, reasonable person, but I don't tolerate any keyboard stuff. We have rarely anything, but I just wanted to put that out there to let anyone know if that's a concern. And if there was, as I said, rarely, I stomp it out really quickly. And if I don't see it, my members are so beautiful and supportive. I might just get a quick message, hey, Renee, you haven't seen this, you need to act on it. But look, so anyone's welcome to be with us if they'd like to be.
I think that's great. I think it's amazing. One of the running themes that is sort of popping up in all of my episodes is that concept, and it's sort of how I run, not run, but it's my purpose in a lot of the things that I do with my business, is that concept of to be seen is to be understood. And I think that that's the most beautiful thing about community spaces like that, is that there is the ability to feel understood by people you don't even know. And I think that that's a really beautiful way to sort of experience that. It's such a vital part of that healing journey, I think, not just with grief, but with everything. So I think that's a really wonderful service. Thanks for joining me. It's been wonderful.
That's a pleasure. It has been wonderful.
Yeah,
We could keep talking and
I
talking and talking, and I
know.
know time is of the essence, and the time
Yeah,
goes so quickly, doesn't
I
it?
know it
But
does.
it's just been wonderful, and I really thank you for not only inviting me, but giving a platform and a space to actually talk about pet loss support. I'm very grateful, so I do thank you, and I'm really hoping that your listeners, I'm hoping there's lots of takeaways that they can receive and take away from this episode. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it's just an important space, and I think yeah, I think thank you for doing the work. When somebody comes to me and they tell me that they've had a pet die, I'm welling up already. So thank you for being able to sit in that space with people. But it is, yeah, it's one of those, it's a
Thank
really
you.
beautiful space. So,
Thank
but yeah,
you.
I agree. We could talk for
Thank you.
hours, but I'm sure our listeners would love us to be quiet at some point or another.
Yes.
So thank you so much,
Thank you.
and all of Renee's details will be in the description for people to be able to find you. If you find socials, support groups, services, all of that will be there for people to be able to
Thank you.
find
Thank you
that.
so much.
So thanks so much, Renee.
Awesome. Thanks heaps, Sam. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed joining us inside the therapy room. Thanks for listening.